Sounds True presents Good Medicine, highlights from a meditation retreat on the practice of Tonglen, recorded in front of a live audience with Tibetan Buddhist teacher and author PEMA Chodron.
The bow actually indicates a respect for one another. The teacher and the students equally worthy of respect. So our subject is compassion. And I'd like to talk tonight about what I know of compassion, what I've learned from my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, what I've learned from the meditation practices that I've done, what I've learned from just living my life about compassion. There's a lot of misunderstandings about compassion. I think people think of it, generally speaking, when you hear the word, it has a lot of very idealistic connotations. Maybe it reminds people of Hallmark cards. But my experience of compassion is that it has to do with our relationship with pain. That we learn true compassion as we begin to have a more open-hearted and open-minded relationship with our own pain. So there's various words that I would like to refer to in this talk, and one word is Maitri. Another word is mindfulness, awareness, meditation. And another is Tonglen Meditation. So first is Maitri. Maitri is the basis of compassion. So I want to talk about that first. It's a Sanskrit word that is often translated as unconditional friendship with oneself. And this is very hard to come by, unconditional acceptance, you could say, of yourself, unconditional friendship with oneself. It was much more common that we disapprove of ourselves and that we denigrate ourselves. Like I saw a cartoon recently, and there's this man kneeling by his bed, looking upward, with his hands grasped in prayer, and he's saying, "I asked you as nicely as I could to make me a better person, but apparently you couldn't be bothered." So Maitri is about beginning to make friends with oneself, not really thinking that it's going to come from the outside anymore. And as you know, we all look to the outside, to other people, to spiritual practice, meditation, jogging. We look all over the place to try to make ourselves feel good about ourselves. And affirmations are all about that. You sort of proclaim, I am smart. I am good looking. I am worthy of being loved. And you sort of scream it, and all the time something in you is saying, yes, you are. So where does this friendship, a kind of being able to relax with yourself, that's really what Maitri is, feeling at home with your own mind and your own body, where does that come from? That's a very important question. Because not only is it the basis of compassion, it's the basis of, it's like the seed of happiness or well-being or glad to be alive. So where does it come from? And I think my opening statement was that all of this has a lot to do with our relationship with pain, our relationship with difficulty. So the Buddha had very revolutionary teaching. And one of the fundamental things that he said was, in a human life there is pain. And a certain amount of pain is inevitable, such as growing old, such as dying. That's the most inevitable one. Such as illness, such as the more that you love, and loving is something that brings tremendous sense of well-being to all of us, to actually love somebody and feel loved. But the more stronger that is, then the more sadness and grief there is at the loss of that person. And such as if you put your hand in fire, it burns. So there's a lot of discomfort in life. And the fundamental teaching of the Buddha was not to struggle against the pain in our life. And that's not the kind of news that we really like to hear. But it turns out to be extremely important thing to contemplate. Is it really true that not struggling any longer with the discomfort of our life, say the embarrassment of being oneself, not struggling with that, but instead beginning using meditation as a tool to move closer to oneself? That means becoming intimate with comfort and discomfort, with pleasure and pain, with grief and with joy, with embarrassment and a feeling of success. So, generally speaking, we think in terms of pairs of opposites. And there's something that's called the 8 worldly dharmas. And there are these pairs of opposites, and I didn't write them down, and I never can remember them, but they go something like this. I think they're victory and defeat. You want the victory part, right? And definitely not defeat. There's praise and blame. Ooh, which do you prefer? There's pleasure and pain. There's loss and gain. And the teaching is that as human beings, we're born to think that if we get praise instead of blame, then that's where happiness lies. And if we get pleasure instead of pain, that's where happiness lies. And if we get gain instead of loss, that's where happiness lies. And the Buddha's teaching was that that is not where happiness lies. Because those things are so transitory and so limited, you get a momentary satisfaction. My friend said to me, this teaching would sell like hotcakes if there was never any gratification. But the fact is, there is gratification from praise, say. There's gratification from a lot of things. You can be addicted to alcohol, addicted to drugs, addicted to sex, addicted to all kinds of things, and there's definitely gratification when you drink that drink or whatever you do. But it has a hangover. And it doesn't add up. And that was what my friend was saying. If there was no gratification, then people could really buy the stuff. But the fact is, because there's a kind of like temporary happiness that comes from buying things, for instance. Ooh, feels so good. Go out, buy something beautiful and new. You look so good. House looks so good. Kids are so happy. Something is better. But it doesn't add up. So, Buddha said is happiness, the root of happiness is beginning to live your life in a way that it kind of opens up. Your mind opens up, your heart opens up, and you say, it includes all of this stuff. It includes victory and defeat, praise and blame, loss and gain, pleasure and pain. It includes it all. And that the root of happiness is thinking bigger like that, knowing somehow that it's in being able to embrace it all. And that is the root of happiness. And struggling against the unpleasant part, the dissatisfaction, struggling against that and just trying to get it all to come out under the column of victory, gain, pleasure, praise, it doesn't add up to a kind of lasting, indestructible, at home in your world, at home in your body, this feeling of Maitri, a kind of fundamental, unshakable feeling right about yourself and your world. So this Maitri is a very profound thing, and it's not like, even though I'm talking of it as a foundation for our life, a foundation for compassion, it's not like it's a beginning step. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So I find that every week of my life, there's kind of a deepening of this friendship with myself. Well, one of the aspects of Maitri is a deepening of not lying to myself, not able to lie to myself anymore. One of the main qualities of this Maitri is honesty with oneself, not lying to oneself. That is really hard because you don't know you're lying to yourself. And blind spots. And really, literally, this very week, yesterday in fact, or day before yesterday, just before coming here, there was this kind of deepening awareness of different ways that I had been deceiving myself. I was just telling someone about this. This was thanks to my 6-year-old granddaughter. Thanks to spending a weekend with my beloved 6-year-old granddaughter, who when I think of someone I love unconditionally, I always think of her. Thanks to spending one weekend alone with her, I had to acknowledge, I had to give up the self-deception that I didn't have much aggression. And then my habit of practicing what I teach and what I practice is when there's the discomfort of, say, like losing it totally with my 6-year-old granddaughter, my habit is to not see that as a horrible thing that's happened, but to actually move closer to the feeling of losing it, which is to say, to let all the words and the commentary, the right and wrong dialogue about it go, and just be there sort of cold turkey with what it feels like to be losing it. And as a result of that, as I moved closer to myself and this experience, it wasn't helping me to not lose it with the sweetheart granddaughter. But I also realized that losing it was only half of it, the self-deception. The real thing was that I was so embarrassed to be this spiritual teacher that all these people come to. I said it's like bribing the kid. Don't tell anyone about grandma. Okay, Alex, this is just between you and Grandma. And so what happens with us is not only do we have parts of ourselves that we find painful. Many of us find our rage painful, or that we're constantly anxious or irritated painful, or that disliking someone painful. But there's also the struggling with that it just doesn't measure up with the image that you carry around that you would like to present to people. So there's the embarrassment of moving closer to oneself. And all of this is the Maitri. Having a sense of humor about this. This is a kind of a sense of humor, honesty. It begins with compassion for yourself. A compassion which is not condoning, but is also not criticizing. It's a compassion which is not in any way trapped in calling yourself right or calling yourself wrong. It's this astoundingly unfamiliar ground between righteous indignation and shame, where you just feel completely righteous to be doing whatever you're doing, or completely embarrassed. Some kind of amazingly unfamiliar but spiritually potent ground between acting out with our words and our actions, or repressing, just pushing it under, just not wanting to go there, just not looking at that, somehow telling yourself that it's not happening, or dissociating completely. That middle ground that's not caught in right, wrong, for, against, that's what is referred to as Maitri. It's also referred to as open heart and open mind. Just completely able to hold the paradox of not falling off to the right or to the left, but somehow staying, as they say, on the razor's edge of Maitri. It doesn't sound very friendly, razor's edge, but somehow holding your seat. Instead of like me sitting up here, holding my seat, and then someone over there is saying, this is a terrible talk. And I sort of fall off to the left with shame. And then someone over there is saying, wow, isn't it great what she's saying? I sort of puff up then. And, that's what happens, right? We get swayed by praise and blame and all the others. And you lose your seat. You fall off to one direction or the other direction. I call it spinning out. You don't just stay sort of cold turkey with the sensation of praise or the sensation of blame as a felt experience in your body. You spin off. So this is all talking about Maitri as the foundation of compassion. So then comes the second word that I want to bring in, which is mindfulness, awareness, meditation. Because really we can talk about these things until we drop dead. But we have to actually do something to be able to see clearly, and see clearly with compassion. Neither one of those things are easy. To see ourselves clearly and to see ourselves clearly with compassion. I remember when I first started practicing, my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, he used to always talk about making friends with oneself. Maitri, making friends with oneself. And as I started this mindfulness awareness sitting meditation, which is a practice of moving closer to oneself, sitting down just with your body and your mind. That's all you're doing, just sitting quietly with this body, with this mind. And the training is continually coming back to it. Your mind keeps spinning off, and you just keep coming back to being just right here with yourself. And this is like a clear seeing, a staying. And I remember once saying to Rinpoche, I said, Rinpoche, I can see so much more clearly what I do, and it doesn't feel to me very friendly. Friendly with myself, this clear seeing feels more like yuck, Like they say, beginning to meditate, it's like your mind is like a pool of water that's all stirred up by winds and very restless and chaotic. So then you begin to meditate and you think what's going to happen is your mind is going to calm down. And that's actually, it does happen like that. And you think what that's going to feel like is peace. No one ever tells you that when the water calms down, then you can see all the old tires and skeletons and tin cans and corpses and all your misdeeds, leering up at you from the bottom of this still pool. So seeing clearly honesty is part of Maitri toward oneself. So the way I was taught, the language that I was given from the beginning, which I've always found immensely helpful, is it's beginning to discover your own humanness. And this is actually your connection with all other people. Beginning to discover the sharedness of the human condition. That Maitri is discovering your own humanness, knowing it. In Zen tradition, they talk a lot, they use the language of becoming intimate with. Becoming intimate with what it feels like to be slandered or betrayed. That awful feeling. What it feels like to lose something that's dear to you. That terrible, heartbreaking, dreadful feeling where everything in you wants to shut down, push away, not feel that. Becoming intimate with. And also intimate with what it feels like to be praised, what it feels like to be loved, what it feels like to be accepted, what it feels like to be a success, the uplifted inspiration, becoming intimate with the whole, as Zorba said, the whole catastrophe. So with the mindfulness awareness meditation, one takes a posture, a meditation posture, which usually is cross-legged, but it can be sitting in a chair also. And there's many, many styles that are taught, but the style that I was taught and that I teach is you become aware of your breath going out. You're aware of your body sitting here and aware of your breath going out. And that is the focus of your meditation, is just awareness, almost a sense of feeling the breath going out. And then you notice that your mind wanders off continually, all the time. The nature of mind is it's thinking, thinking, thinking. And whenever you notice that that's what's happening, you keep bringing yourself back, just coming back to being right here with this body, as uncomfortable or comfortable as this body might be feeling. Coming right back to this mood, as disturbed or relaxed as this mood might be. Coming back to this mind, which might be talking. They say sometimes the mind is like a turbulent river or a churned up ocean. Sometimes if you sit for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, you see that it's like more kinds of weather than you can count on your fingers. All the different moods and weather changes of the mind. So this is kind of the training in terms of Maitri, or making friends with oneself. Is this very difficult to do, but straightforward practice of just training in what I like to think of as just staying. Just stay, 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 like training the dog. And as you know, with dogs, if you train them by hitting them and beating them, they can become very obedient, but they're not flexible. And they're easily terrified and easily confused if everything doesn't go just a certain way. But if you train a dog with love and kindness and clarity, and then the dog is equally obedient but also very flexible, has a sense of humor, can roll with the changes, So which kind of dog do you want to be? So when we train ourselves, train the mind, it's with this kindness, with this honesty, but also this gentleness, this kindness. So when we say stay, stay, sort of pith instruction, stay, and then mind goes off and off and off. When the mind goes off, you don't just like hit yourself. Bad dog. No, you just come back. Give yourself a little doggy treat. So it's like, someone once said, it's like very naive almost. There's like no big deal about the meditation. Whatever arises in the mind, you just acknowledge that it's there. It's like giving it all the space in the world to just be there, and then you just come back to being in your body with the quality of your mind, of your mood, just being here, present here in the present moment. Then the mind goes off again. They say it's like feeding the baby. You put the spoon in the baby's mouth and the baby's attention starts wandering. You don't hit the baby. You just, you say cute things like, here's the birdie or something, and then the baby gets your attention. You stick that spoon in there. So just with that kind of simplicity, you just keep coming back and you repeat it over and over and over. Just this training and staying with yourself. And interestingly enough, this is a training in living without prejudice. It's a fundamental training in non-aggression. And this is living without prejudice towards yourself and fundamental non-aggression towards yourself. So all of this is talking about Maitri and the practice of cultivating the loving kindness or unconditional friendship with oneself, which is so all-inclusive, honest, and friendly. But the talk is about compassion. So then compassion sort of just begins to dawn on you, encouraged by the practice of Tonglen, which is one where you actually cultivate compassion kind of purposely. But it's based not on being kind to other people, but on knowing your own experience. Having this unconditional, compassionate, honest relationship with yourself. Which, as I said, is discovering your humanness or exploring humanness, exploring the human condition. And then you begin to realize that what you experience is our shared humanity. Your storylines might be different. Our storylines are different. Our life histories are different. But the feeling of anger has been felt the same by men and women and children from the beginning of time. The feeling of anger is felt in the same way. Jealousy is felt in the same way. There's lots of different things that trigger it, that get it going. But if you let the words go, training in the mindfulness awareness practice, and can sit with just the raw energy of the anger or the jealousy or the craving or the loneliness or the depression, if there's a sense of knowing it, being intimate without all the words, that is our shared humanity. That is what we all share. So from this actually comes what is really compassion. That compassion is in no way pity or looking down on another person or helping out someone less fortunate in a way that actually can be helpful in a limited way, because someone needs food, you give them food. Someone needs money, you give them money, or whatever. But if you've ever been on the receiving end of condescending compassion, you know that it really doesn't do much for you, because it disempowers you, and you basically feel like someone is seeing you as wounded, as flawed in some way, and that you are pathetic and need to be cared for, and that doesn't exactly do it for you. It's not exactly how you want to go around feeling. So genuine compassion is when you stand in your own shoes, which could be another way of talking about Maitri, then you are standing in the shoes of other people as well. It's like our shared humanity. So with the Tonglen practice, it's actually built on this realization. Or, on the other hand, you can have no such realization, begin to do the Tonglen practice, and it begins to awaken this realization of our shared humanity. And that is when you feel discomfort in any form, the automatic response is to push that away and to drink something, smoke something, do something, buy something, do something to not feel that. But the Tonglen approach is that you breathe it in, letting the words go. You breathe in the discomfort and own it completely with the thought in your mind that what I am feeling in this very moment is felt by millions and millions of people all over this world. And then you send out that which you feel will bring relief to you in that situation. You send out that which is joyful, that which is uplifted. Sometimes people will send out compassion or just send out some sense of spaciousness or send out a sense of, if they feel that what they're needing right then would be some love, they might send out love to themselves and all the other people who are feeling like they are. But as somebody once said, but you don't have to be too philosophical about it. You could just send yourself a good cup of coffee. But the thing is that it's not like that you're doing this for yourself. You're doing it for every person, every man, every woman. And you know every man and every woman because of knowing yourself. So your experience becomes the stepping stone for understanding the experience of other people. And that kind of compassion is what is real compassion. And that is a relationship between equals. There's no up-down in the relationship. You can look in the eyes of someone who's suffering and be there for them because they don't trigger off all kinds of, or they may trigger off all kinds of unresolved feelings in you, but you know what it is to sit with those feelings, to become intimate with those feelings, to not run away, and therefore you can stay with that person. So it moves from being able to just stay with oneself to being able to stay with all that you encounter in your life, the situations, the people in your life. So this is my understanding of compassion, and this compassion comes from opening oneself through the meditation of the basic sitting meditation and the practice of Tonglen. Just in general, though, just even with this view, even if you never do these practices, just this view that moving closer to your experience instead of trying to run away from it becomes the basis of really being able to open your heart to a multitude of situations, multitude of people which now seem impossible to open your heart to. So you walk down a street, and maybe your aspiration is to keep your heart and mind open for one block. And then actually what that becomes a Maitri and compassion block. Because what happens is, because your aspiration is sincere to keep your heart and mind open, never before in your whole life had you noticed how often you shut down. That you can't believe how many people you feel aversion to, how many people you don't want to look at, how many people you lust after. Attachment and aversion, attraction and dislike. One short block can be quite a strong spiritual practice. So this is my understanding of compassion based on what I've been taught and what I've experienced, that it has to do with changing our relationship with pain and with pleasure. Willing not to run from pain and willing not to just hold on to pleasure with a kind of desperation and fear that we're going to lose it. A sense of enjoying, but able to give it away or share it So the essence of the Tonglen practice is when things hurt, you think to yourself, other people feel this. And when things are delightful, something tastes good, you feel cool when you've been hot, or you get something you really wanted. Whatever it is, you get in the habit of thinking, may other people enjoy this. Sometimes you think of certain people you know are having a tough time. You wish that they could just have, maybe they don't have to get the job you just got, but that they could have the sense of happiness that you're feeling. Or it can be very, very general. You can just wish that other people everywhere could feel this. So somehow compassion is what heals us. Compassion doesn't, when you really understand it, it doesn't burn you out. It heals you because it's a continual feeling of your world opening up and your heart and your mind opening up. And it's a feeling of being more and more relaxed with your own body, your own mind, and the situations and people that you find yourself with. The practice of Tonglen was brought to Tibet in the 10th century by a man named Atisha. He came from India, and he brought with him this practice of Tonglen. And along with the practice of Tonglen, he brought a whole teaching, which has come down to us as something that's called the slogans of Atisha, and there are these 49 different slogans which all somehow are in the spirit of Tonglen. And the book called Training the Mind by Trungpa Rinpoche, a little blue book, gives all of these slogans. And the book that I wrote called Start Where You Are also teaches on all of these slogans. And somehow the slogans are the teachings, and then the Tonglen is the practice that makes these teachings possible. Now, the essence of these teachings that Atisha brought to Tibet is bringing difficult circumstances, using difficult circumstances as the method for waking up completely, or you could say attaining enlightenment. And this is why it's such good teaching for our times. And I guess it was good teachings for those times as well. But that's the earmark of it. It's actually using what is difficult, bringing difficult circumstances onto the path of enlightenment. They become the actual basis for waking up, rather than how we usually think of it as they become a big obstacle. People say, my meditation would be perfect if it wasn't for my husband, or my boss, or my wife, or my teenager, or my 2-year-old, or my heartbreak, or my ill health, or my current failure, whatever it is, that all of that is interfering with my spiritual life, my tranquility. This peaceful image that I like to have of myself is being wrecked all the time by the fact that life is causing me to fly into rages continually. So it's very helpful to have a teaching that says that those very difficult circumstances of our lives are the basis of awakening, using those. Now, Atisha himself heard about these teachings. Here he was in 10th century India. He heard about these teachings, but he couldn't find them anywhere, and he traveled to Indonesia, which I'm sure was quite a feat in those days, would be a feat even these days. And he looked all over Indonesia till he found the one person there that was still teaching these and got these teachings on Tonglen. We have it pretty easy these days. You can see it on video, hear it on audio, come to your local center or whatever and hear the teachings. But in those days, it wasn't easy. So I always feel a lot of gratitude to people like Atisha who are willing to put in all those work, because otherwise
it could have just gone extinct. It could have been an endangered species. Way back there in the 10th century, it could have just passed away in Indonesia and never got passed on to anyone. But it got passed on to Atisha, and then he was invited to Tibet, and he passed it on to Tibet, where it really took hold, and it through it coming to Tibet that it's been passed on in an unbroken lineage to today. Now the story about Atisha is that he actually got to the point where he liked difficulties, because he thought of difficulties as the meat and potatoes of becoming enlightened. And particularly, he liked difficult situations, just the situations that you and I just despise. He actually liked, because he wanted to see where he was still capable of being thrown off his seat, because that's where he wanted to see who he was, to have complete honesty with himself, no deception, and then to make friends. So this word maitri comes in, this unconditional friendship. He wanted to develop unconditional friendship with himself, so that when people provoked him and so forth, and he saw his anger, he saw his jealousy, he saw his resentment and envy and different things, that was something that he could make friends with, that he could come to know the energy of those feelings, not as an obstacle, but by letting the storyline go. He could, with his basic mindfulness awareness sitting practice, he could sit, and up would come all these things in his life, and he would sit with them. Fear or depression, all kinds of things. So he liked those things because he would sit with those things, let the discursive thoughts, the discussion, the internal conversation about them go, which is our practice to train in learning how to do that gradually over time, how to let, when the thoughts come, to also let them go. He would train that way, and then he would sit with the energy as a felt quality in his body, the feeling of anger or the feeling of jealousy, whatever, and let it somehow transform his being and not spin off into blaming self, blaming others, an endless chain reaction of suffering, but somehow just letting all the chain reaction storylines go and just sitting, moving closer to his own energy. And particularly, he found, and this has been passed along, that these very painful, we call negative energies of something like anger, have enormous energy in them. In other words, it's sort of a fast path to enlightenment, because there's so much energy in those emotions that if we're not completely caught up in them and, following along with the internal conversation, and then it's like tapping into enough energy to light up Los Angeles, or light up New York City or Paris or the whole globe for that matter. Lots of energy. So there's this kind of outrageous teaching that sort of underlines all of this, which I'll just throw out for you to contemplate for the rest of your life. And that is, the more neurosis, the more wisdom. But it's this idea of the energy that's there, if it's not all caught up in me, and I must prove myself, and I must struggle against this, and the enormous sense of self getting built up out of this energy. If you can let the storyline go, which is not easy to do, but that is our practice, then there is this energy. And somehow it is a transformative energy. So Atisha, he liked difficult circumstances, and then I'll be talking more and more about Tonglen, and this was his main practice, and how he worked with this difficult energy in Tonglen as becoming the actual basis of awakening his compassionate heart. The difficulty itself was what he used, or what was used, what he learned from his teacher in Indonesia, to awaken compassion and the sense of shared humanity or kinship with all sentient beings. So it's said that he heard that the people in Tibet were very, very peaceful, gentle, good-natured, just wonderful people. And he thought, oh dear, nothing to work with. So the story is that he brought with him his really ill-tempered, disagreeable, ornery tea boy, The Bengali tea boy becomes like this metaphor for all the people in our lives that just drive us crazy. Atisha brought him along. He could have said, now's my chance to get rid of this guy. But instead he brought him with him to Tibet because he wanted someone that would keep him honest. This Bengali tea boy apparently was just like your mother or your boss or all the people that, actually you kind of can't get rid of them. They're like the ex-husband or the ex-wife or the person that continues to drive you crazy year after year. He brought this guy with him. And then the Tibetans, who do have a great sense of humor, they always tell the story. And when he got to Tibet, he realized that he really need not have bought that Bengali ticket. There was as much difficulty there as any place. So nothing's changed much since the 10th century. Well, the teachings on Tonglen were taught widely in Tibet when Tisha arrived, and then they sort of went underground again. And they never were lost. The lineage continued, but they were very secret and they weren't used that much. It seems like there are times when Tonglen, it's a ripe time to teach it, and there are times when it's actually misunderstood and not so appropriate. And now seems like a ripe time. But in any case, it went underground. And a few centuries later, in the 12th century, there was a man called Geshe Chakawa, and he became completely intrigued with these teachings again. And the story is that he was walking through a room and he saw a book open on a bed, and there was written in this book, "Take all the pain for yourself and give all the pleasure to other people." Now, you or I would have said, yuck, what a terrible idea. But Geshe Chagawa was absolutely fascinated with this teaching, like a victory to the others and defeat to oneself, or taking in the pain and sending out the pleasure. And he was so intrigued that he started saying, well, wow, can I learn more about this? And again, because the teachings had gone under, he didn't have to go to Indonesia, but he had to look all over Tibet, and finally he found someone who could give him the teachings, and then he practiced them for the rest of his life. And he's actually the one that systematized the slogans so that we have now this book, Training the Mind, or I was able to study these slogans with Trungpa Rinpoche, and the teachings have passed down on the Tonglen practice and the slogans because Geshe Chakawa sort of wrote them all down and made it a very clear, systematic presentation. The story on the Geshe Chakawa is that a lot of his students were lepers, and there was no cure for leprosy. And he taught Tonglen to his students that were lepers. Now this is very interesting. There's a parallel today with that Tonglen is being taught more and more widely in hospice situations, particularly with in AIDS hospices and with people with terminal cancer and terminal illnesses of all kinds, where you do not expect to live and there's a feeling of hopelessness about your situation. And it's being taught that, for instance, with AIDS, that you do the Tonglen practice, breathing in with the aspiration or the wish that your sickness that you're feeling, and also perhaps what you know about shame from having AIDS, or what you know about anger from having AIDS, or resentment from having AIDS, or any of the strong emotions that you might feel. You say, since I'm already feeling these, may I feel this so that all my brothers and sisters who have AIDS could be free of it. May I feel it completely so all of them could be free of it. And then sending out healing in any way that seems real and comforting to you. So in some sense, you're willing to feel it so that others could be free of it. And at the same time, it's like acknowledging that you and all the others are in the same boat. And the interesting thing is that the reason that this is being taught more and more widely is that people are finding not that it cures people of AIDS or cancer. It has all kinds of results in terms of healing, but mostly it heals at the level of the spirit, that people feel like they're disability, their pain, their despair, their fear, suddenly has meaning, and there's a purpose to it. It can be used as the basis for benefiting others. So back in the time of Geshe Chikawa, he was having the lepers do the Tonglen practice exactly in that spirit. Since I'm feeling it anyway, may I feel this so that all others could be free of it. That I'm feeling it, could that be the basis of all others being free of it? So breathing in and completely feeling what you were feeling in terms of pain and also emotional difficulty, and sending out relief to yourself and all the others. So he was having them do this. And the Tibetan story goes that many of them were being cured of leprosy. And so, needless to say, lepers were coming to him from all over the place to get cured, and then he'd give them this kind of astonishing practice, which was just what nobody wanted to hear, but people would try it. So Geshe Chikawa, he had his own Bengali tea person, and it was his brother. His brother was very cynical about anything spiritual. His brother didn't like Chikawa, was always giving him a hard time, and basically was a thorn in Chikawa's side, and vice versa. But this brother became curious why all these lepers were coming and why so many of them were going away cured. So he started listening at the door. So it's like he's out there in the hallway. He wouldn't deign to come in here and hear the teachings, Like my brother wouldn't come in and hear me teach, but he's listening out at the door. Or he buys the video. He gets it in a brown paper cover so nobody knows, and goes down to the basement, locks the doors, and watches, and finds out what's going on. And Chikawa began to notice that his brother was becoming much more kind and had better sense of humor and was more flexible and more open. And it occurred to him that maybe his brother was listening to the teachings. And so he talked to him about it, and sure enough, that was what was happening. So at that point, when all of that was occurring, the teachings were somewhat being taught in secret, just at this monastery. It was spreading by word of mouth, but it was pretty much a secret thing. And then he said, listen, if this can help my brother, it can help anybody. So at that point, he started teaching it more widely. So I don't know, maybe that's why I started teaching it, right? Maybe I have one of these brothers or sisters or something. But in any case, that's the story of how it started getting out and how it got passed down. Finally, to the point where Trungpa Rinpoche's teacher, who's called Sechen Khantrul, taught this practice to Trungpa Rinpoche, and then he taught it to those of us who were his students, and that's why his students, such as myself, are able to pass it on to you. So there's this lineage of people who not only became curious about this approach of taking difficulty and having it be the basis of awakening Maitri, which is this unconditional friendship with oneself, and also awakening one's compassion for other people. Not only having a kind of curiosity about that, but actually beginning to apply the teachings, to apply the practice. So Tonglen is taught as a formal practice, and in our next session we will be doing it as a formal practice. But I particularly feel that Tonglen is a practice which is extremely appropriate and powerful to do on the spot. And what I mean by that is, when you see pain out there, when you're walking down the street or reading the newspaper or things in your immediate domestic situation or among your friends, or any suffering in the world that you hear about or come in contact with, and that it just occurs to you to begin to do Tonglen, either for the person that's suffering or for the confusion or fear or even anger or irritation or whatever it brings up in you. In other words, when there's pain and your reaction to pain, it occurs to you to do Tonglen either for the person in pain or for yourself and all the other people like you that are somehow afraid of pain, don't want to go near pain, somehow have a lot of emotional baggage around pain. So doing Tonglen on the spot when you see suffering, particularly, we have so many situations in our lives. From the time that I was a child, I remember when I was 11, I went with my parents on a trip to Mexico City. And I came from rural New Jersey. And it was the most amazing experience. I remember it so vividly because I had never seen people begging on the streets, and I had never seen starving animals. And I was like completely blown away by this. And it would never have occurred to me in my life that within my lifetime I would see people begging on the streets in all the cities of North America and see starving animals in the cities of North America. In those days, this was pre-Eisenhower, and this was the 50s, and then that whole area, everything was like Leave It to Beaver. Of course, in our domestic situations, it was just as messy as it is today, but the kind of pretense was like Leave It to Beaver. Everything was like cheerful and uplifted and clean, and there wasn't a lot hanging out. But these days, death is closer, poverty is inescapable, human suffering is inescapable. That's probably why Tonglen is such a ripe time for Tonglen, because we walk down the streets and we can't escape it. And again we see things where either we want to avert our eyes and not look, but we feel somehow pained by that, or we wish we could help. We see someone who's black and blue, has been beaten, or somebody beating somebody, or we see suffering of all kinds, and often there is absolutely nothing we can do. And we wish we could do something, and Tonglen is something that we can do. We can begin to breathe in and out with the wish that the person being abused, as well as the abuser, could be free of their suffering, that somehow kindness could come into the lives of these people, and also into one's own life and the fear and aversion that one feels about these things, or all the complexity of feelings. So doing Tonglen on the spot like that. And then also any time, say we're in an argument with someone and someone is yelling at us, something is going on with us, and all kinds of painful emotions are charging through us and we don't know what to do. Right on the spot, you can begin to do Tonglen, breathing in and out, to open up the situation between you and this other person. And you do it for yourself and all the other people all over the world who are being yelled at, or who are feeling afraid, or are feeling unworthy, or feeling depressed, or whatever it is that you're feeling. It becomes your link with other people, and there's some way to open up and change our relationship with difficult circumstances. And particularly, this is a practice about working with our fear of pain. Gradually, slowly, at our own pace, working with our fear of pain. So I like to teach Tonglen as a practice to do on the spot. I receive a lot of letters, people writing to me about their experiences with Tonglen. In each of the books that I've written, there is a chapter on Tonglen. And they've perhaps read this, and this is the first time they've heard about Tonglen. Or maybe they've listened to this audio tape, which is called Awakening Compassion, or the one called Noble Heart, and there's teachings on Tonglen in there. And they've become interested in it, but before that, perhaps they had never heard about it. And they're trying to practice the practice, and they write to me and tell me what their experience is. So a man wrote to me who said that he had never heard of Tonglen, and when he heard about it, he realized that he had, without even knowing what the practice was, that he had practiced it. And he told me about this situation. He said he was a high school counselor. And in his position as a counselor, he had supported a young woman in her decision, teenage young woman, he had supported her in a decision to leave her father's home and move in with her mother. Then he got a phone call from the father. And he described the father in the letter. I imagined it as this guy who was about 6'8" and weighed about 800 pounds. You know, this is like the image. And I imagined this guy who wrote the letter as being about 4'2" and weighing about 25 pounds. You know, this is kind of the situation the man felt himself in. And he said the father was an ex-cop who had been removed from the police force because of his aggression. So this was the man that was going to come in to him and have a little discussion with him about the fact that he had counseled his daughter to move out of his home. He knew the guy was really angry, and sure enough, the guy was really angry. The man came in, sat across from him, and just vented. He was furious. And the man who wrote the letter said that he sat there like absolutely terrified. But he said he was so terrified that it's sort of like he stopped thinking about anything and he just kind of went blank and he was just there with the guy. And then for some reason, which he never knew what it was, he started to do Tonglen, which he had never heard about, which is that he just started breathing in his own fear and pain and this man's pain, sort of both at once. He said he didn't really think about it, but there was just so much pain in the room that he started breathing in and breathing out, and breathing in and breathing out. And the man is like screaming and red in the face and shaking his fist. And all of a sudden, the man who wrote the letter said, out of his mouth came these words, "You must really love your daughter a lot to be so upset." And he said, then this great big guy just broke down and started to cry. And so he said, you know, it was like, usually he would have defended himself, he would have felt he had to protect himself, he would have done all the stuff that would be guaranteed to escalate the aggression in the room, because that's our normal, that's our just ordinary response. It's like we're so scared and we feel so disempowered by what's going on that we try to build ourselves up by, and we say all the things that just escalate the aggression and pain. But this guy didn't dream up what to say. He just created some kind of space there, involuntarily. It just happened. And words came out that spoke, communicated from the heart. Now, we don't always get these success stories. I have to tell you that right now. That there's not always happy endings to these stories. You'll say, I do this and like everything will turn out. That was the first teaching of the Buddha. It's like, you can't get it all together. You know, you can't get life to work out perfect. It just has its up and down. But in this case, it allows a space for some communication from the heart to happen that's genuine. And so if there's any possibility of communication from the heart happening, it comes out of that genuine space of opening to what's occurring rather than shutting out what's occurring and trying to build yourself up in some way. Likewise, people often will find themselves in that situation and they have a self-image of a do-gooder. I am a holy person. I am a do-gooder. I am a professional person. And then they try to say all these contrived, ungenuine, helpful things to this guy who's furious. And the guy hears that it's just false and that you're condescending to him, and it also escalates the aggression. So we are really good at escalating aggression. And usually we don't really mean to. We mean to try to get out of this awful situation in which we find ourselves, and that's the problem. And so the Tonglen approach and the approach of the Lojong teachings altogether. Lojong means training the mind. These teachings that include the practice of Tonglen and the 49 slogans are called the Lojong teachings. That's what Atisha brought to Tibet, and that's what Geshe Chakawa continued. These Lojong teachings and the practice of Tonglen, they're all about not trying to get rid of the awful situation in what we find ourselves, but actually leaning into it, moving toward it, touching the heart of our pain, touching the center of our pain. And these teachings are meant to be done extremely patiently, gently, and gradually at our own speed. Somehow, they're not meant that then you say to yourself, I must do this, and therefore you do something which actually you don't feel ready to do. You just do it at your own speed. Whenever you feel ready to do it, you do it. And it's recommended, for instance, on the spot to do it in lighter weight situations. If it occurs to you, like you're just feeling mildly irritated. And it occurs to you, because that's a kind of uncomfortable feeling, but it's not an overwhelmed feeling, to just do Tonglen with that and for all yourself and all the other irritated people. Opening the heart is opening the heart. You don't have to, jump right into the middle of, for instance, of the most traumatic thing in the history of your life. I'm going to just jump right into the middle of something which traumatized me as a child, which still traumatizes me as an adult, or traumatized me so that I'm still working with the trauma. You don't have to just jump right into the middle of these terrifying, overwhelming situations. But if you're working with just the milder irritations and discomforts of life, you're training and opening the heart so that gradually over time, without you even really trying, you might find that you have more courage to move closer to the really difficult things.
This concludes part 1 of Good Medicine with PEMA Chodron. Our program continues with part 2. Sounds True presents Good Medicine, Part 2 with PEMA Chodron.
During this session, I'm going to teach Tonglen practice. And I'd like to talk first about different styles of Tonglen. The very simplest style, which I think would be helpful for every single one of us, and something well worth cultivating in one's life, is taking a Tonglen attitude towards pleasure and pain whenever it arises in your life. I've gotten in the habit of doing this, and I don't always remember to do it, but more and more it becomes spontaneous and natural. And this is when things are painful, in any form, when things are difficult. Usually that in itself will remind me just the quality of difficulty, the quality of struggle or pain or dissatisfaction or unpleasantness. That itself will remind me to just have the simple thought, other people feel this. Now that sounds so simplistic, maybe not all that important, but believe me, it makes a big difference. Because what happens with pain is the sense of isolation gets so strong, and the sense of our particular personal burden and the loneliness of that and the desperation of that. So this simple thought, which sometimes is quite challenging to people, that you say it but you don't quite believe it. You think you're the only one. And I've had people many times say to me, this pain that I feel, I think actually no one else in the world feels this. And then I can say to them with tremendous confidence, wrong. But what is not wrong is that we do have that feeling often that I am the only one that has this particular pain. So maybe it will be quite a challenge to you to say this, and it might not seem genuine, but even that is beginning to shake up your complacency about pain being just your individual burden. It somehow shakes it up just to even contemplate that other people feel this. And in many cases, my own experience is just that which could become so introverted, a downward spiral of depression and isolation. Just the thought that other people feel this opens it up. It's what Trungpa Rinpoche used to call thinking bigger. And I think I've said this before, I'll say it again, that compassion or the sense of shared humanity, of our kinship with each other, this is what heals. This is what heals the desperation that we feel, the darkness that we feel, and the chain reaction of aggression or chain reaction of misery that gets triggered off by just sometimes a slight shift in the energy, and we feel uneasy or agitated or unhappy in some way, and then that spirals into a chain reaction of pain. One thing leading to another, a sort of struggle to try to get away from that uneasy, uncomfortable feeling. So this is a basic Tonglen logic, to just, when you feel the discomfort, to just have the thought, other people feel this. And then if you want to take it a rather dramatic step further, you can say, may we all be free of this. But it's enough just to acknowledge that other people feel this. And then the most dramatic and probably most difficult, taking it even a step further, would be to say, since I'm feeling this anyway, may I be feeling it so all others could be free of it. So it's kind of 3 levels of courage. The least courage is just to say other people feel this, and that is enough. But if in that particular moment of time it feels genuine to say, may we all, I don't know if so much be free of this is the right way to say it, but may this become a path of awakening the heart for all of us. And then the one that sometimes you might feel really genuinely be able to say, just because of how you're feeling in that moment of time, to take it the deepest level of courage is to say, since I'm feeling this anyway, may I feel it so that others could be free of it. So this is Tonglen attitude towards pain on the spot in your everyday life. It doesn't involve the breathing in and breathing out, but it's the spirit of Tonglen. And I'd like to sort of leave you with this simplest form, because sometimes the actual practice of Tonglen feels like too much too soon. And if that's your reaction to the practice, this period of studying together, the practice of Tonglen, is introducing you to a whole new way of relating with pain. But if the practice itself seems overwhelming, particularly if the practice feels extremely frightening to you, it's best to just put it aside, maybe to never take it up again, or perhaps later, unexpectedly, it will be just what you need. But in any case, this very simple form of just when you feel pain, thinking of others feeling this also, this is news we can use. And then the other side of it is pleasure or delight. Tonglen has the in-breath, which is about suffering, the out-breath, which is about happiness or joy or relief. So the simplest way of working with Tonglen attitude towards pleasure and delight and well-being and inspiration and happiness is that whenever you experience happiness in your life, you think to yourself, may other people feel this. And sometimes actually it's quite useful and helpful to people to make it more personal, that when you feel pain, you say, this pain that I'm feeling, it might occur to you that someone you know actually feels this way. And may that particular person be able to experience this as a path of awakening. And in terms of joy, you might wish that this particular pleasure that you're feeling at this moment, may some specific person or people have this pleasure. Someone you know has lots of darkness in their life, isn't able to have any, because of what they're going through, physical pain, mental pain, that they have no joy or no access to joy or inspiration in their life. And so you might specifically say, this taste of delicious soup or delicious cake or whatever it might be, may so-and-so have the pleasure that I'm feeling now. May they just have that pleasure. It doesn't have to be around cake or soup, but just could they have the pleasure? And then spread it out more. Could people all over the world who are in darkness, who have no sweetness in their life, could they experience this? So sharing the wealth. Now when I talk about happiness or inspiration, it can be the smallest of things. And I train this way all the time, that whenever it occurs to me that in this moment I'm feeling a sense of relief or a sense of happiness, to cherish these moments, to acknowledge them. It's almost like saying to yourself, how unusual, in this moment I am happy. And you know, there are a lot of moments like that in everyday life, but we miss them and we emphasize more the pain. So these moments are things like you're cold and you put on another article of clothing, or you go inside or something and then you feel warmth. Or the taste of something, or you're too hot and someone opens a window, or you take off an article of clothing and you feel cool. It's just, they don't have to be big deal winning the Academy Award. But the big deals are good ones too. You know, when you get the job, or the person you're in love with turns out they also love you, or whatever it might be. Pleasure even reading a good book, seeing a good movie, whatever it might be, that you acknowledge that there's some inspiration or gratitude or some heartfelt feeling. And then you have the thought, may others experience this. So if you leave with nothing else in terms of practice, this practice is a good one. When there's pain, think of others. When there's delight, think of others. Not in any kind of do-gooder sense, you see, but it's kind of the sense of sharing the human experience, bringing us closer to one another. That being the simplest form of on-the-spot attitude, of the Lojong or Tonglen attitude, now I'm going to teach the most complicated. And this is a Tonglen instruction that was given by Trungpa Rinpoche to his students. This is the form of Tonglen that I was taught, and I'll now pass on to you. So the Tonglen practice in the style that Trungpa Rinpoche taught has 4 stages. The first stage is called a flash of openness, just a moment of opening the mind. And traditionally it's called a flash of the absolute bodhicitta. That's kind of not necessary to have those fancy foreign words, just a sense of openness. And the next stage is one breathes in quality of claustrophobia in the form of breathing in like a dark, heavy, hot, breathing it in on the medium of the breath. And breathing out cool and refreshing, sort of the quality of inspiration or letting go or well-being. And one does that synchronized with the breath. Breathing in the quality of claustrophobia, breathing out the quality of openness or spaciousness. So breathing in dark, heavy, and hot, sending out cool and light and refreshing. Then the third stage is working with something personal and real to you. And this is actually, as a formal practice, this is where it gets tough. And this is why I teach Tonglen on the spot, because on the spot there's a real situation occurring, your own personal suffering, which can be a stepping stone to understanding the suffering that other people feel just like you, or the suffering of another person. Something immediate is happening and you begin to do the Tonglen. It doesn't even occur to you to do it unless something is cooking. But when you're sitting here and suddenly a gong rings, I'm going to ring the gong when we start Tonglen, and then somebody says, now start doing Tonglen about someone else's suffering or your own or whatever. it's very easy to just like spend the whole time trying to figure out what to do Tonglen for. And also I had the experience for years where the gong would ring. To begin Tonglen, traditionally the gong rings like this. And then the person who's leading the meditation will say, begin Tonglen. So that gong would ring, and my experience for years was I would just sort of like space out. And then about 10 minutes later or something, there would be an ending gong. And at that point, I would wake up out of my, wherever I was, and realize that I had just had 10 or 15 minutes of not doing Tonglen. This was beginning to get embarrassing because I was becoming more and more famous as a Tonglen teacher. I thought if they only knew. So it was at that point that I really started doing it on the spot more and more. And as a result of that, now when that gong rings, or I started doing Tonglen practice without a gong, I have a lot of material to work with. It's become so second nature to do it on the spot, and therefore there's a lot of current issues going on, my own or the people in my life where there's suffering happening, pain happening. But in any case, today when we get to that third stage of working with something particular, I'm going to suggest that in this particular morning meditation that you do Tonglen for a family member, anybody in your family. And I choose that on purpose because that representing usually for us intimacy, intimate relationships, and usually also difficult relationships. And so in this sense, you might choose someone in your family and they might be in difficulty. Perhaps your mother or your brother is schizophrenic, or your father or your sister are addicted to alcohol or heroin or crack or something in any case. And so you want to work with a particular individual and you start doing the Tonglen for them, and it's very genuine, and the whole session you just do the Tonglen for them. On the other hand, it's just as likely with a family member that just bringing up the face of your mother or your sister or your father or your brother or your uncle or child or whoever it might be brings up a lot of conflicting feelings. Everything from sometimes a mixture of loving them and hating them, sometimes absolute aversion. And so in that sense, when you think of the family member and it brings up confusion for you, then you could shift your attention and start to do Tonglen with breathing in, connecting with whatever it is you're feeling, your aversion, your confusion, your mixture of like and dislike, breathing in and connecting with it fully, and sending out to yourself and all others in the same boat as you, whatever it is you feel you need at that point to open up the situation. Sending out spaciousness, relief, relaxation, loving kindness, good cup of coffee, whatever it might be. So this third stage is very particular, and then the fourth stage is universalizing, which is to say, this is what I've been talking about all along, that when you do Tonglen for your mother who's in difficulty, and it's very straightforward and it's not complicated, you do it for your mother who is alcoholic or who is suffering from tremendous pain from cancer or senility and confusion or whatever it might be, and then you extend it out and do it for all the other men and women in the world who are suffering in the same way as your mother is. Or if you think of your mother or someone in the family and you feel a lot of confusion, aversion, fear, whatever it might be, you start doing Tonglen with what you're feeling and all the other people who feel the same things as you do. So I talk of it as four stages, the third being something very real and particular, and the fourth generalizing it more, using your own personal experience as a stepping stone for all the other people who feel like you do, or all the other people that are in the same situation as your mother or father, whoever. But sometimes it's even more valuable to think of it as 3 stages, and that the third stage has a kind of part 1 and part 2. Part 1 being your mother, and then almost simultaneously you do it for all the mothers or all the people in your mother's situation. Or your fear, and almost simultaneously, if you can, you do it for all the people who are feeling fear in this very moment of time, in this very moment, all over the world, people who are feeling what you're feeling. So now, just to review again, I'm going to say 3 stages of Tonglen. The first is a flash of openness. The idea here is that if we make the suffering, the breathing in, too solid a thing, if it's like completely claustrophobic and overwhelming, and then people will often feel like they're breathing in. We used to call it the black sack syndrome, that you're breathing in and you're like this sack that's filling up with poison, you know, and then there's no ability to breathe out, and so every in-breath you just get more and more like toxic waste dump syndrome. And so, you know, you do it like that, it's completely, you know, who needs it, right? Like, you say, well, this is crazy. And it's a misunderstanding of the practice. To use images, it's more like breathing into a vast space. Or sometimes people will use the image of the heart, in the sense of breathing in to the heart, and as you breathe in, the heart gets bigger and bigger. It gets as big as it needs to be able to embrace or contain the fear or the pain that you're breathing in. You just make the heart as big as you can. So it's like opening up your whole being. So some sense of breathing into a big space, or a heart that can open infinitely. And that's the idea of the flash of openness or spaciousness at the beginning, is that it's like a flashing, sometimes people say flashing a sense of big sky, or flashing a sense of standing next to the ocean and the vastness of looking out at the sea, or being high up in the hills or the mountains and looking out, being in the airplane, looking out the airplane window over the cloud world. But some sense of whatever in your mind evokes a sense of kind of limitless space, lying on your back, looking up. If you're someplace where you can see the stars and you look up and the sky is so vast and endless, infinite. So just a sense of opening. And the more you do a mindfulness awareness practice, the more you have access to some sort of sense of gap or spaciousness, not caught upness. So the idea is at the beginning of the practice to just have a flash of that as best you can. So when the gong rings, this is like a very helpful assistance. Now, when you sit and do Tonglen, you're not always going to have a gong. But should you have one, then that can be the same as the flash or the moment of spaciousness. Because when you hear the gong, you just listen to the sound, and then you start into the second stage. But it's like a kind of a opening there, or a spacious moment. So then this is like a kind of underlying understanding that begins to develop, is that no matter how much pain you get in touch with, breathing in, it's like opening up the space when you breathe in. Instead of pushing away, making barriers around your heart, making fortresses around your whole being, the breathing in is a dissolving of all of the barriers and opening up into a vast space. That's always there. And then when you send out, it's a sense of letting go, opening up. Again, opening to a lot of space, a lot of relaxation, the accessibility of the big sky always being here. So then you move into the second stage, which is actually then diving right into the middle of the discomfort and the pain and the delight, but in a visual way. The eyes can be open or closed, and you breathe, and the practice is on the medium of the breath. One of the slogans, one of the Lojong slogans, actually gives Tonglen instruction. The slogan is, practice sending and taking on the medium of the breath. One should practice taking and sending on the medium of the breath. That's actually the Tonglen instruction. So in this case, one breathes in, dark, heavy, and hot, and one takes it in through all the pores of one's body. Sense of breathing in completely, fully. And then, because, as I've said, what that's doing is dissolving all the barriers that are around us, then one can breathe out on the out-breath, light, cool, and refreshing, and you radiate that out 360 degrees. It just goes out all the pores of your body. So even though it's synchronized with the breath going in and out, it's actually more a full body breathing in and a full body breathing out. If you just do it on the breath, sometimes, people get stuck in their throat. There's like this little, this little thing. So you have a sense of breathing in completely, sending out completely, but it's synchronized with the in and out breath. So there's a lot of relaxation just in the fact that you're breathing in deeply, sending out deeply. So that's the second stage, and that is visual, breathing in. Now some people don't like they don't experience claustrophobia because it's dark and heavy and hot. And people sometimes say they like to breathe in red and fiery, like that. And they send out maybe blue or whatever feels refreshing, turquoise. One man was telling me he always sends out turquoise with a lot of little stars in it. Well, whatever works for you. But the idea is breathing in the kind of atmosphere of claustrophobia. So sometimes for people that's heavy and dark, hot, sending out cool and refreshing. Now, as I say, the eyes can be open or closed, and it's very important that you give equal time to the in-breath and the out-breath. Most of us, when we start to do the practice, particularly as a formal practice of sitting, we find that we either have a preference for the in-breath or for the out-breath, so we get this kind of or people feel like they can take on pain. Boy, they know pain, but they don't feel like they have anything to give. And so there's kind of imbalance. Or there's the, terrified of the pain, which is, I think, more like where I usually come from. So it's sort of like, and you want to, groove on the space. So the idea is equal time, You can breathe in deeply and breathe out deeply. Breathe in and breathe out, sort of equal time. With the idea that somehow you're ventilating the whole atmosphere, opening up the space. And in the process, you will find that in-breath is more frightening, out-breath is you're more attached to, or vice versa. And all of that is part of what's extremely helpful in terms of the Maitri practice of moving closer to yourself, knowing who you are and what you do, what you're afraid of and what you cling to. And then we move on to the third stage, which is to start to do Tonglen for a real situation, your own pain, and then for all others in the same boat as you. That's the third stage, part 1 and 2. Or you start doing Tonglen for someone in the family, and then for all the people that are in the same situation as that family member. And also, when you start to get to the particular stage of Tonglen, sometimes you just stick with one person. That's what happens to you. And sometimes it just starts spreading, and it's one person after another, or one animal after another, or whatever, that it doesn't just stay with one person, and that's fine. So this is very personal. Whatever happens, you just work with that. And if you start to do the practice and you're saying to yourself, I can't do this, then you can do Tonglen for all the people who can't do this. And if you say, I don't like this is crazy, you can do Tonglen for all the people who don't like where they find themselves and want to get out of there. I'm afraid there's no way to escape from Tonglen. Wherever's happening, you can use that. People will sometimes say, if Tonglen on the spot is so much more to the point, then why do we do the formal practice of Tonglen? really the main reason is because if you do the formal practice of Tonglen, then it occurs to you to do it on the spot. And also because the formal practice of Tonglen, with or without the 4 stages, meaning with the 4 stages or just simply having a flash of openness and then moving into the breathing in and out for a particular situation, is very, very useful when you're sitting by the bedside of someone who's dying or sitting with someone who's very, very ill, that you can actually do Tonglen practice in those kind of difficult situations, and it's very, very helpful. When doing Tonglen as a formal practice, incorporated in your meditation, what is generally taught is that first you do mindfulness awareness, sitting practice, or other form of sitting meditation practice. And then, having done that for a while so that you're some sense of settling, moving closer to yourself and being here, then you begin to do Tonglen practice. And at the end of the Tonglen, again, you return to the sitting practice of the mindfulness awareness sitting practice. So it is sandwiched with a mindfulness awareness sitting meditation practice. We'll start this morning with a very, very short period of sitting, just a few moments, and then go right into the Tonglen. I'll hit the gong twice, and as I was suggesting, if you listen to the sound of the gong going out into the space, that's a very useful way of opening the mind, resting the mind, a moment of stillness or openness. In any case, whether you are able to rest the mind in a moment of stillness or not, continue right on into the next stage. I've had any number of people say, well, I couldn't do the first stage, so I just gave up and didn't bother to go any further. So it's, sort of gesture, and in any case, it's very brief, and then move on to the second stage of breathing in and out the quality of claustrophobia and inspiration or spaciousness. So we'll begin with a short period of sitting. Sit as comfortably as you can on a meditation cushion or in a chair. Keep your eyes open, but let the eye gaze be downward about 4 to 6 feet in front of you, which is to say that you're not looking down, close down, but out a little bit. So there's something open about the eye gaze, but it's down enough so that you're not distracted. And in particular, feel the front of your body is open. The heart area, the whole front of the body is open. So in that way, you sit up as comfortably but as upright as you can. Good posture. So if you feel yourself slumping at any time, that might feel like covering over the heart. Slumping could feel like covering over the heart in some way. So then you just open up again, lift up so that the heart area is open again. In that way, the posture is symbolic of open heart. And it's symbolic of courage also, bravery, willing to be here fully with an open heart. And then I think it's very helpful to, in order to become grounded here in your body, to just become aware of your body, starting with the soles of your feet. Just move very slowly from the soles of your feet, up your legs, up your torso, slowly moving upward to the top of the head. And particularly noticing any areas where there's tension. And if there's tension, particularly pausing at that place and relaxing that tension as much as you can, noticing it and relaxing it, then moving on upward to the top of the head. Just grounding yourself in your body. When you reach the top of your head, then just slowly again move down the body. And this is not thinking about the body, but actually feeling your face, feeling your neck and your shoulders, down the torso, the arms and hands, slowly moving down until you reach the bottom of your feet. Actually feeling your body. And do this at your own pace, but when you do arrive again at the soles of your feet, then shift your awareness to your breath. And begin to be aware of your breath going outward. And then there's like a pause as your breath comes in, and then aware of your breath going out. Mindfulness and awareness of the breath going out. Just coming back again and again to the breath going out. Breath goes out into space. Feel the breath going out into space. And just a kind of waiting, like a gap, and then the breath goes out again. Just coming back again and again to the breath going out. Thoughts will come up in your mind. When you realize that your attention has wandered and you're talking to yourself, and very simply, with tremendous gentleness, no big deal quality, just come back again to the awareness, feeling the breath going outward. When you realize that your mind has wandered off, you can say to yourself, thinking. This is not saying that it's wrong or right, it's just acknowledging that thinking is occurring. And then come back again to this feeling the breath going out, awareness of the breath going out. Now beginning with a moment of stillness or the flash of the absolute bodhicitta. Then move into the next stage, breathing in the heavy and hot, sending out cool, light, and refreshing. And the eyes can be open or closed. Do this synchronized with the breath. The dark coming in, the cool and refreshing going out. Heavy, thick quality coming in completely. brilliant light, fresh quality, radiating it out, sending it out in all directions completely. And when you feel ready, when you feel this is synchronized on the breath, then move on to doing Tonglen for a family member, and then as soon as possible, universalizing, doing it for all the people in that family member's situation, or for all the people feeling what you're feeling. Doing Tonglen with a family member. Either what they trigger off in you, or just doing it straightforwardly for them. Sometimes it helps to bring up the face or say the name of the person that you are working with. Remember to always move from the particular to the universal, using whatever you're working with as a stepping stone for understanding the broader suffering that is just like what you're feeling or what your family member is feeling. And when you hear this gong, you gradually move back to doing mindfulness awareness practice. I'm going to give you some little Tonglen hints and then I'd like to tell you some Tonglen stories. Some of the hints I wanted to give were, often people will ask, when I'm doing the Tonglen and my mind wanders, we always talk about mind wandering in mindfulness awareness practice. You could expect that your mind will wander, and in fact, when it does, just simply say, it's thinking, come back. But no one mentions that mind also wanders when we do Tonglen. Big surprise. So when the mind wanders in Tonglen, you also just come back, and you can come back to the very beginning with the openness or the breathing in and out, the texture of claustrophobia and spaciousness. You could come back at the very beginning or the second stage, or just come back to where you are of working with a particular instance. You can even just come back to working with another instance. But come back to doing Tonglen wherever you wish to start with it. So that's vague enough, isn't it? But the idea is there's no particular point in the technique that you have to come back to. You just come back to something real and start doing the technique again. And if you feel that it really helps you to start at the beginning, start at the beginning. If it helps you just to do the breathing in the heaviness and sending out the relief or the spaciousness and then moving on to a particular thing, do that. So Tonglen is very personal that way. You do what really works for you. I told you I get a lot of letters, and I'd like to share some of these stories with you because I don't know about you, but I remember stories better than abstract teaching. This is a story that a woman wrote to me. She said her young son, 16-year-old son, was addicted to heroin. She was in a support group with a lot of other parents of young people, young men and women addicted to heroin. When she heard about Tonglen practice and started to practice it, she wanted to do Tonglen for her son. And this was a case where she could not do it. It was too painful. It was too frightening. There was too much mixed feelings. When she would think of her son and his addiction, it would just bring up more than she could handle. So she tried, but it was too overwhelming. She was honest enough to say, I can't do it. So she decided she would do it for all the parents. And that was also more than she could handle. I thought, this is one honest lady. Usually, we don't have that kind of honesty. We just feel guilty that we are not good enough to do this for our son who needs our help, or the other parents. But there was a kind of honesty that she acknowledged. She had enough Maitri to be able to acknowledge that she wasn't there yet. This is important, to be able to be that honest. That is a Maitri issue. Like, the more loving kindness there is for oneself, the more one can accept that we aren't there yet. And there can be the aspiration to spend our life moving closer to these kind of things, but we work with what is possible and not with what is impossible. And in doing so, as time passes, we find that we can be there in situations that 6 months, a year, 5 years ago were absolutely impossible to open to. It happens sort of by itself, just because of willing to sort of turn in the direction of opening to what is possible. So she said she didn't know what to do because she really wanted to work with the practice, somehow work with the practice. She felt it would benefit her, it would benefit her son, it would benefit the family. She said about that time she turned on the television and there was her hometown football team. She lived, as I remember, in the Midwest. It was kind of a small town, and they had just lost the game. So here were all these high school age young men who were pretty downhearted. And she started doing Tonglen for the losing team. And she said that she could do. And she really felt for these guys and their disappointment and their heartbreak at losing. And she could breathe in and really open her heart to all of them. It was something she could do. And the reason she wrote me the letter is she said the amazing thing that she discovered from that was that in doing that, it was the first time she really got the feeling of what it felt like to open her heart. By being that honest and choosing a situation where she naturally felt compassion and decided to do Tonglen in that situation, she got the feeling of how it really felt. And she said in so doing, she just kept doing Tonglen in those kind of situations where she already had some compassion and it was not overwhelming. And she said then some kind of inner strength began to develop in her where she could keep her heart open in more and more difficult situations. And she said she wasn't quite there yet completely with her son, but she could do it for the families now. So some kind of moving in a direction kind of indirectly, if you see what I mean. So from that I learned from her that just opening the heart to anything is training and opening the heart. It doesn't have to be the overwhelm situations. Well, one of my favorites is based on the teaching that if you start to practice, say, compassion practice, you think then all your compassion will come oozing out of the pores of your body and you'll suddenly be much more compassionate, only to discover that it heightens your awareness of your lack of compassion. In the same way, if you decide to practice patience, you will see your impatience as you never have before, and so forth. And this is actually, in terms of these teachings of using difficult circumstances as the path of awakening, this gives you plenty to work with. So this story, I got the letter from a man in San Francisco. He had taken a weekend course from me where I taught on something called the 6 paramitas. And one of these is developing patience. And another paramita is generosity, and there's 6 of them. And at the end of the teaching, I had said just what I said a moment ago, which was, if you're going to start to practice generosity, I suggested that they take one of the paramitas and really try to use it as an everyday practice for a couple of weeks. And I said, believe me, if you're going to take generosity, you're going to see your stinginess as you've never seen it before. And then that actually becomes the basis of the Maitri, of being able to open your heart big enough to include your stinginess and not call it right, not call it wrong, but really know stinginess with an open heart and an open mind, with lack of prejudice, not justifying it or condemning it. And I said also, it is the basis of compassion, as I've been saying again and again. When you touch into your own stinginess, you can begin to breathe in your own stinginess and stinginess of all other people. It's like doing a PhD thesis on stinginess and sending out whatever. But using this stuff, rather than thinking then that's an obstacle to your compassion, it actually becomes how you understand. Standing in your own stingy shoes, you understand what it is to stand in the shoes of all the other stingy people. Without condescension, it's like same boat, shared humanity. The real compassion comes from this. So this man said he decided he was going to work with patience. So Monday morning, he got in his car to drive from Berkeley to San Francisco in the traffic jam. And as he drove, he felt impatience arising, but he just kept coming back, practicing patience. And he said, you know, he was all the way across the Bay Bridge, and he was so patient. He was just like feeling so proud of himself, because he was just like, God, I just never knew I could be so patient. He got to an off-ramp, and he said unconsciously he wasn't really acknowledging the fact that he was getting late for work. Somehow he was so into being patient that he was kind of shoving that under a little bit. He got to this off-ramp, and there was a crosswalk, and a guy was crossing the street. He was crossing right in front of this man's car, and he was walking very, very slowly. He started getting kind of antsy, but he was patient. And said all of a sudden the guy turned and started kicking his car and screaming at him. Whereupon he just blew his lid, because he had been, in the name of patience, he had been basically repressing, what he was really feeling. And this guy, we call guys like this gurus, and just blew his cover and started screaming, and he started screaming at this guy who was screaming at him. And then he said it just occurred to him, like out of the blue, he started doing Tonglen for himself and this guy who were, inches from each other, screaming at each other. And he just said, mirror reflections of each other. And he just started breathing in and out for the guy and for himself and for the whole thing. And he said it was like a great moment. And what the point of the story, he said, was that if there hadn't been that teaching on Tonglen and that teaching on using whatever arises, he said, at that moment he would have thought that he had been a real failure, that the patience practice was a complete failure, and he never would have gone there again. It would have been just like, I can't do it. But instead, by using his aggression as actually the practice, it was a good moment, of a shared moment with the man in front of him who was also yelling. So that's one that I like a lot. Another one comes from this book by Ken Wilber and Treya Wilber. It's called Grace and Grit, and it's the story of Treya Wilber's death from cancer. They had been married like a week or something when she found out she had cancer. So it's the story, really, his journals, Ken Wilber's journals, and Treya Wilber's journals. Now, Treya Wilber did a lot of Tonglen during this time. Her teacher was a wonderful Tibetan teacher who has died several years ago, named Kalu Rinpoche, and he gave her the Tonglen practice, and she practiced it a lot. She had a very special pin in the shape of a star that was a good luck token for her, and she writes about this in the book. She said that she equated it with good luck because she had worn it through her sessions of chemotherapy and all the difficult times she had worn it, and then she lost the pin, and it caused her to feel a lot of fear and depression. So she was kind of going down. She didn't like the symbolism of losing this pin. It was like a bad omen or something, she felt. And everyone was trying to cheer her up and rouse her spirits, and it wasn't working. But then she herself remembered Tonglen. This was interesting because she remembered the out-breath of Tonglen. We emphasize the in-breath a lot, but she remembered the giving part, which is actually also letting go. Like the in-breath is like going to places that scare you, or willing to open to what you usually shut down on. The out-breath is letting go of what you usually hold on to, what you grasp onto. So she started to visualize these star-shaped pins, millions of them, and giving them out, sending them out to everybody. Instead of, this panic and despair about having lost it, she just started giving them away, giving them away, giving them away. So I thought that was really great. She said as a result of that, her main practice in everyday life, on the spot, began to be giving things away. And she said as a result of that, she began to notice her stinginess. And this was what I thought was so powerful. She said, as a result of that, I began to notice that there were times when I absolutely could not do it. And she described it how they were such petty times. Like sitting around the table with her family and in a restaurant, and they have a particularly lovely bottle of wine. And it's down to like 2 sips at the bottom. And the other people, leave to go to the bathroom or something, and she just pours it in the glass and drinks it down, Having said to herself, I want this wine, but I should give it away, because she's practicing, giving it away, and she just like takes it. And she said it was always like that, this humiliatingly petty things, but she literally could not do it. And then her insight, which I found very powerful, was that she said, then she realized the real essence of Tonglen, because she started doing Tonglen for all the people who just couldn't do it. All the people who had these high aspirations and actually could not live up to them. And she started doing Tonglen for herself and all the other people in that situation. And she said she felt that was the deepest, most profound understanding that she had of the practice. rather than it was some kind of ideal of generosity she was supposed to live up to. So you see, it's very interesting, because if she hadn't been trying and continuing day after day to practice generosity or letting go of that which she was attached to, then she wouldn't have had the insight that came from realizing that she sometimes just could not give, the last cookie crumb. So with these kind of practices, you just can't have your big ideals. You can use your ideals as a kind of a way to get jump-started, but then you're thrown right into the midst of who you really are and where you're really at, and that becomes the basis of the practice. Doing Tonglen for all the other people who don't live up to their own ideals. Then there's another one, which this woman told me, this is a good one for people who kind of feel like you have to be very orthodox, and if you're not being very orthodox in your Tonglen instruction, you have to check the book and figure it out, and you have to have permission from somebody to do it just right. Let's see, I'm breathing in for 2.5 seconds and out for 2 1/4 seconds. Maybe I ought to call someone because something wrong there, or whatever. So this was a young woman who was doing a Lojong and Tonglen intensive, a month-long practice at Gampo Abbey. And this was a young woman who had severe sexual abuse as a child. And she had done a lot of work around this before she came to this intensive. So this was not like her first time. She had been working for years with the trauma of her early life. But she felt that Tonglen would now be also very helpful in working with it, because she was at a place where it would be helpful. And she was ready to open more, and she felt that she was ready. Nevertheless, when we started doing the practice, she said that for a while it was just a lot of shutting down and a wooden feeling and feeling like a fake and not being able to really do it, and a lot of like trying to do Tonglen for her father, for instance, feeling that she should be feeling some kind of forgiveness and just not being able to come anywhere near that, and then feeling guilty about that, forgetting to do Tonglen for the guilty people. And the whole thing was just like not exactly a magical makeover. Like, woo, come to this Tonglen intensive with PEMA, and boy, then everything's I haven't made. So she said one day it occurred to her that she had always identified with caged birds, that she felt a lot of empathy with caged birds, identified with them. So she said she started breathing in for all the caged birds, and on the out-breath opening the door to the cages and letting the birds fly out. She said she'd been doing that for several weeks and had not told me about it because she was sure I would say, "You can't do that." But she finally came in to tell me about it, because she said on that particular morning she had been doing that, and she was breathing in for all the birds in cages, breathing out, opening the gates and the doors and the birds flying out. And this bird, in her sort of visualization, flew out and sat on the shoulder of this person who, when it turned around, was her father. And she said that was the first, it was like such a breakthrough in terms of some different feeling in her heart towards her father that just kind of came out of nowhere. She didn't dream it up or try to conjure it up or something, but there was like a real different feeling there. So based on that, she had the courage to tell me about her made-up version of Tonglen. So I tell that story so that you also feel that you have permission to do what works and trust it. So sometimes people say that when they do Tonglen, they feel like they're breathing in and breathing out, but they have it under control. Like as if there's a temperature gauge, and they're not going to let it get too hot or too cold, and they'll just breathe in enough to sort of feel like they're a good person, but not enough to actually really feel anything. And let go and breathe out just enough, to sort of feel like they could tell their meditation instructor that they were doing Tonglen. But really, desperately, as someone once said, I do the practice, but secretly I hope it doesn't work. And so, in terms of tips, you may definitely find a very heightened awareness of the fact that you're terrified to breathe in and also terrified to let go. So you could have tremendous compassion for yourself in that situation. And I say again and again, let the practice develop at its own speed. Just do it for lighter weight situations like the losing team. Or really, just stop doing the Tonglen altogether if it feels overwhelming, like too much too soon, and just put it aside. And it may not be the practice for you. The view of it, I think, is very beneficial and healing to everyone. But the actual practice, it might be just too much and not the practice for you. And then that may be it. On the other hand, people often find that sometime in the future, it just spontaneously comes back as just what you need in a certain situation at a certain time. So allow yourself to, not try to fit yourself into the having to be a Tonglen person. The result of this time together and this sharing, this teaching, and this practice can simply be that it begins to introduce you to the notion that you could move closer to that which you usually push away, and that there is some healing in that. And then you do it at your own speed, in your own way. And as I said, if it's just at the level of that when you feel pain, you think others feel this, that itself is just a very strong healing thing to do. And also, you can just do it as an aspiration practice. There was a man who told me about, he lived in a meditation center, a Zen center, in the middle of a big city. And they had all gotten up for the morning sitting, which was at 5, so it was a little before 5. He was in the kitchen making himself coffee. And outside in the street, they heard a woman screaming. It sounded like she was being attacked. And what he actually did was got a group of people together and went out to try to help this woman. But he said before that, he had been practicing Tonglen a lot. And before that, there was just this moment of absolute stark recognition that he did not want to be in that woman's, he did not want to exchange himself. He didn't want to come close to what that woman was having, what her life was like and what she was going through right then. He did not want to breathe in and be in her shoes for even a second. And he said at that point, he just said, I'm not there yet. And he made an aspiration that before I die, could I have the courage and bravery to feel like I could breathe in that woman's pain and send out relief to her, that I could have a feeling of willing to stand in her shoes. So that's another way you can work with it. I think what I'm trying to get across here is just to be very honest with yourself about where you're at and not try to beat yourself up with this practice. So, the Buddha is sometimes referred to as a great physician, a sort of great doctor, the great physician. And it's said that he looked out at sentient beings everywhere and saw that the main sickness was that we tried to protect ourselves from what it was to be human. And this is, in traditional Buddhist language, would be called ego clinging or ego grasping. But essentially it's putting up walls around your heart, putting up walls around yourself in order to protect yourself from pain. But in so doing, it weakens you. In so doing, you become more afraid, less flexible, and less open to your life. And as you get older, the amount of terrors in your life become greater rather than lesser. And sometimes an image for the ego clinging or this kind of protection that I think is a powerful one is this story that someone told me about her parents in Florida who lived in a walled community. And in order to go in there, you had to go through gates and there were guards, and nothing was allowed to come into this community that would cause problems, if that's possible. But in any case, that was the concept. And she said when her parents first moved there, they felt very secure. And this is the idea of the ego, is to make you feel secure and safe. And then she said, but then they began to be paranoid about all the people who came in to fix their broken washing machine or fix their broken television or whatever it might be, deliver their pizza or whatever. They began to be sort of paranoid about other people coming in. And so their fear, instead of feeling more secure, they were becoming more nervous. And then they realized they couldn't go to the beach. The beach was not within the walls, and they wanted to go out to the beach. They used to go to the beach all the time, but now somehow the idea of going outside these walls became more and more threatening, and the fact of what might come in became more and more threatening. And she just saw her parents, as they were getting older, becoming more and more afraid. More and more things terrified them. And when I heard that story, I thought it's a perfect example of this illness that the Buddha looked out and saw, that the greatest illness was this trying to protect yourself from the realities of life. Just the fact that we do age, that we grow old, that we die, that we lose those that we love, and that there is suffering in life, inherent, that when we put our hand in fire, it burns us, that pain cannot be avoided. But in trying to deny it and just get rid of it, we become more and more afraid, more and more fearful, less and less kind and flexible, and less capable of compassion and love. So he was called the great physician because he tried to give medicine for curing that. So one of the good medicines is the Tonglen, and another is the mindfulness awareness practice. But the Tonglen medicine is a particularly interesting one because this is where you use poison as medicine. And actually the image for Tonglen is just that, or for the whole Lojong teachings altogether, using difficulties as the path of enlightenment. The image is using poison as medicine. So good medicine. These teachings are good medicine, even though they might seem like poison. And the image is, this is what they say. I actually have never really checked it out, but they say the image is of the peacock, because apparently peacocks eat poison, and as a result of that, the colors in their tail get brighter and brighter. So using the poisons of our life, such as our aggression, our dislikes, our jealousy, our fear, our loneliness, our cravings and addictions, using these as good medicine, using these as a path of awakening. So I've shared as best I can this good medicine that Trungpa Rinpoche compassionately shared with his students. And I feel fortunate to have had this passed down through all the centuries so that it can still be presented here today and that we can all benefit from it. And to the degree that we benefit from it, those that we come in contact with will benefit from it. So that's the good news and the good medicine.
This concludes Good Medicine with Pema Chodron. Music by Nwang Ketchog from the album Sounds of Peace, available through Sounds True. For more information on retreats with Pema Chodron, please write Gampo Abbey, Pleasant Bay, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada, B0E2P0. If you would like additional copies of this audio learning series, or to receive a complete catalog of transformational audio and video tapes, please call Sounds True 800-333-9185 or write the Sounds True catalog, P.O. Box 8010, Boulder, Colorado 80306. You may also visit us at www.soundstrue.com. Thank you for listening.